Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're back with another video, and today I'm going to put you guys down here, and we're going to do an interesting video today discussing like what is acceptable conditions. I felt like someone said this in the comments, and I feel like it's kind of a video that I should talk about is acceptable conditions for like your vintage cards. I mean, of course, we all want a perfect PSA 10 worthy card, but the first card, we're going to compare a bunch of them and explain what the difference is and what you should be looking for when buying any card that's vintage. So we're going to go over this vial plume. We're going to start off very simple with, okay, let's just look at the surface. So you can already tell by the surface those scratches already popping a 9 regardless. And you can see the centering is very off, top to bottom. It just looks like shit. And this would be a card that I would probably say just don't even bother. Now we go to the back, and look, we already have our first culprit right there. That's enough to already take you down to like an 8 easily. And look, the bottom's still thick, like I was saying, and there's still a spot there. So 1, 2, 3, and towards the top 4 or 5. So that's already going to dock you down to like a PSA 5. So this is what I would consider PSA 5 condition, maybe even a 4. So next we're going to talk about what I consider as like your grail. That would be like your perfect condition you want to look for. And this would be everything perfect. Centering is perfect. There are no scratches on our surface. And let's take a look at the back. So the back, we're looking. Now let's compare every little corner. See, I would consider that. That's just a little, that's not even like, that's from the case itself. So I would consider that PSA 10 worthy condition. So we have all the edges and centering perfect. And yeah, like altogether, a pretty well centered card. And without any like major scratches or issues. Now, so that's what we all hope for. So this is the reality of what comes in like near mint. Like this is what your card will come in looking like. Especially in vintage. So you'll have like all the sides messed up like this. Then the other side messed up like this. Up top it'll be messed up like that. And this is what I would consider just unacceptable. And what I would just consider like acceptable, and we're going to go over the Glaceon to just show what would be like considered more acceptable is like, okay, yeah, this isn't a 10 by any means, but it just isn't garbage. You know what I mean? So we're going to go over that real quick here. So we'll look at the condition of this. So we check. The only thing I see on this card is like minor scratches on the front. So like I said, we're not talking a 10, but this is still very presentable for a vintage card of like, okay, well, like there's only smudges. Everything looks pretty good for the most part. And then we get to the back, and like I said, we have like our one spot there. So this is going to disqualify this from a PSA 10, but this whole side is nice and blue. We only really have that spot there. That tiny little spot there. But at least we're talking nice, blue for the most part there across the sides. We have that tiny little speck right there. So like this is not going to be a PSA 10 card whatsoever, but we're at least talking a safe, I would call it like a PSA 6 to 7. And still in this condition, that's still like $700, $800. So like the condition really does matter on cards like this, and especially the presentability of the front. Because even if someone wants this as a nice binder card just to have a really, rare card, they're going to be happy to see at least the front looks beautiful. So that helps. But like also just like if someone's collecting vintage, they're not going to want to own one of these and just all this be white, all this be white. Like even myself, if I see a vintage card that look like this, I'm pretty much willing to buy it at market because like the tiny bit of damage is very minimal. And like I said, if I would have been like picky about this card though and not bought it, and said, well, I don't know, it has a little spot right there. It's not a PSA 10. And I mean, you can do that if you want. If I wouldn't have bought this for 160, I still would have missed out on it going up to like at least $600, because I would definitely consider this a PSA 5, like bare minimum. And a PSA 5 is still like 550. So, bare minimum, I still over doubled my money on this card. And it was just a good investment and just something I really like to have in my collection. So it's kind of a win-win for me either way. But so now we're going to go over like the difference of like what I would consider acceptable. So like a card like this, we're going to take a perfect card like this. So there's no damage on it whatsoever. And I'm going to show you the gradual fuck up of it. So now, since it's pretty much perfect, we only have a tiny little spot up there. Let's just say that's not there. Just forget that for a minute. And it's perfect. We're going to say what would probably give it like, so you could probably get away with this getting a 10. This is just a shitty card, by the way. I'm just doing this as an example. But that would probably get away with being a 10 just because it's only one minor spot there. And they would probably let that slide as a 10. But like if it's any more than that, like so we're going to take this and just kind of rub it a little more like that. Now you're at a 9. You know what I mean? Just a tiny bit, like just that little bit right there. Even it's basically junk. So that's how hard it is to really get 10s, and none of that could be on the card. Now this is why I accept most vintage cards. I'm going to show what most vintage cards actually look like that are for sale. Of cards like Glaceon. So they mostly look a lot like this. We're going to just get it ready here. And this is why I accepted my Glaceon, because it doesn't look like this. That's why, like, even though that Glaceon is not perfect, I still considered it pretty safe to invest in because it doesn't look just atrocious. And with vintage, you kind of have to go by that sometimes, because you're not always going to find it perfect. So this is what most vintage usually looks like. They don't have like a little nick here. Like, I want to have like a little... Shit, I fucked that up. But either way, it'll have like a tiny little like nick. And you really got to watch too, because this will hold a card back. It's like it'll have like a little white spot like right there or on the Pokeball. Like this will be white instead of red. So you really got to watch out for that. But most vintage cards tend to look a lot like what I'm showing you here. Of like, you just have whitening up at the top, on the sides, at the bottom, at the sides, like, and then the front will be all fucking, like, scratched up, like, and like, look like that. You know what I mean? All like scratches everywhere. So, and like I said, people will list these as near mint, or they'll just say it's just like a fair condition copy. And yes, I do think that's fucked up, but that's why you shouldn't buy cards really with no pictures, because most of them, like I would say 9 out of 10 on TCG Play, if you order them and they don't have a picture and they're like a vintage card like Glaceon, they're going to come to you looking just like that. Like pretty close. I mean, maybe a little bit better condition than up here, but they're going to come to you with whitening all across here. They're going to have whitening down the sides. They're going to have whitening over here. They're going to have whitening down here. And that's just, to me, like, it's not even worth collecting. Like, that's just considered a damaged card to me. That's considered damaged condition, that I wouldn't even really want it in my collection. Even if it was cheap, like the $160, I would have passed if it looked like this. Because, yeah, like, it's probably not going to get expensive, because, let's face it, there's not a lot of Glaceons out there, so it would still be, like, have some value, but not as much as one that is in very respectable condition. Maybe not perfect condition, like we've said on this video, but definitely respectable condition, to where, like, I'm still proud to own a card that looks like that. You know what I mean? That's vintage. So, and as you can see, it still appreciates. Now, if it was in terrible condition and I bought it for $160, yeah, it probably would have only went up like $10 or $20, and it wouldn't be worth as much. But since it's above the PSA 6 like threshold, it still is like, a $500, $600, $700 card. So it still paid off to buy it, even though most people would say, well, the condition wasn't perfect, so I'm not buying it. You kind of have to see past that sometimes when it's an older card, because like I said, finding good condition cards is just very, very tough. Like here's another one with the Blastoise. Like see how that has there, it's there. And, you know, like I said, down here. So this is not a contender at all for a PSA 9, but it's still like a nice like PSA 6 ish card, I would say. So you're still looking at like a decent looking card that someone would still want in their collection. That it's definitely not a $50 damage card, you know. So like there is a big difference that it's more of a like a $300 to $400 nice condition but not perfect card, and that's going to sell a lot better than a super damaged card where it's all white. Like a $50 Blastoise is going to have all that be like dark, like bright white across it. So like that's the difference of conditions and what they end up looking like. So just to recap, this is your PSA. This is what most vintage cards look like after you're buying them on TCG Player. Like if you look for Glaceons, for $200, they're going to look a lot like this. Okay, like that's what you're going to find for $200, and that would be what you would find. And like this, you wouldn't find for like under $500 or $600, since it is fairly decent. Like not perfect, but not terrible either. So that's why this would be a lot more expensive than it having massive damage all over it. So you would still have made money buying that card just because it's still in good condition. But if you spent $160 for it all fucked up like that, like this, then you probably wouldn't have made that much money. So condition really is everything when you're buying vintage expensive cards, especially if you don't want to buy the 10 because they're too expensive. But buying, like an 8, a 7, it can still pay off if it's a super vintage card like Glaceon. Like I would have gladly bought this card for $160 any day of the week in its current condition. Now, if it was damaged really bad and not even presentable with like those scratches we showed, then yeah, I probably would have passed on buying this for $160. But since I realized how good the condition was and jumped on it, there's actually one that doesn't look even as good as this one, listed for like $700-800. I think someone even wanted $1,000 for one of these, and the condition was like PSA 4, PSA 5 condition. So it does make a difference. Not buying like cards that are not damaged, but maybe not perfect either when it comes to vintage. Because when you go to look, you're just not even going to find a perfect raw Glaceon for sale. Like it's just, someone would grade it, because it's a $9,000 card in a 10. So people are going to grade it rather than just sell it raw if it's perfect. So that's the point of this video. I hope you guys have learned something on like what to look out for. And this is what, like I said, 9 out of 10 eBay listings and TCG listings, or that don't have pictures, this is what you'll get when it comes to your door. Like it will look like this, and you'll spend like $200 for the cheap Glaceon that you thought you saved money on, and it's almost not even sellable. So anyway, I hope you guys learned something from this. I figured it was good to dive a little deeper into this. And I was talking to someone from Europe, and they said, like finding vintage cards there is a nightmare too. And I can imagine it would be a lot worse in Europe to find vintage cards like Glaceon, because like really how many people were bringing those to Europe, from Mystic Dawn. But either way, just an interesting video. I would like to do a comparison one day of like what you find in Europe vintage for like $500 for Glaceon and what you find in America. But for like $500 in America, you're going to find a PSA 5 Glaceon, and not much better than that, And in Europe, it's probably like $700 gets you a PSA 5 or $600 gets you a PSA 5. So that's just kind of where the market's at. Like you're not finding this card in like respectable PSA 5 condition or above, like PSA 5 to 8 condition for $200 anymore. Like you're going to spend at least $500 to get a PSA 5 to a PSA 8. So still fetching premiums over just a really bad copy. So I just kind of wanted to clear that up for a lot of people, so everybody kind of knew a little bit more of what I'm discussing in this video, that condition really is everything, especially when it comes to vintage. So anyway, hope you guys enjoyed it. We're out.